The axe froze mid-swing above Calliope's neck as a bullet shattered the executioner's wrist, sending the weapon spinning into the crowd of jeering onlookers. Blood sprayed across the wooden platform where she knelt, bound and blindfolded, her chestnut hair catching the morning sun like spun copper. "Nobody dies today," growled a voice from the edge of Riverside's town square. "Rough as desert sand and twice as dangerous." Flint Ashmore stepped from the shadows between buildings, his weathered leather coat swaying with each deliberate stride. The crowd parted before him like water, recognizing death when it walked among them. His pale gray eyes, cold as winter frost, never left the trembling figure on the chopping block. Sheriff Cornelius Grimm clutched his smoking Colt,
uncertainty
flickering across his weathered face. "This ain't your concern, Drifter. That woman murdered Judge Pemberton in cold blood. Did she now?" Flint's hand rested casually on the grip of his own weapon, fingers drumming a slow rhythm against worn leather. "Funny thing about judges, they tend to make enemies of folks they've wronged." The crowd murmured uneasily. Judge Pemberton had been found stabbed through the heart in his chambers 3 nights ago, and Calliope Meridian, the town's seamstress, had been discovered standing over his body, knife in hand and blood on her dress, but Flint had been watching from the saloon window when she'd stumbled from the courthouse, her movements wrong, somehow too jerky, too confused, like someone waking from a dream they couldn't remember. "Evidence speaks for itself," Mayor Blackwater declared from his position near the platform. "She was caught red-handed."
evidence
"Can lie," Flint replied, his gaze finally shifting to Calliope's face. Even with the blindfold, he could see her trembling, not from fear of death, but from something deeper. Confusion. Horror at finding herself in a nightmare she couldn't understand. 3 days he'd been in Riverside, just another drifter passing through on his way to nowhere. But something about the woman on that platform had stopped him cold. Maybe it was the way she'd walked through town, with her head held high, despite the whispers and accusations. Maybe it was how she'd continued sewing clothes for the children, even as her own death warrant was being written. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was love at first sight, hitting him like a lightning bolt when he'd glimpsed her through the courthouse window, arguing with the judge about some injustice he was inflicting on a widow's family. "Step away, stranger," Sheriff Grimm warned, his gun trembling in his grip. "I've got 20 men here who'll cut you down." Flint's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then you'd better hope they're faster than the last 20 men who tried." Reputation preceded him, Flint Ashmore, the ghost of the territories. A man who'd carved his legend in gunpowder and blood across a dozen states. But that was before he'd seen her. "Please," Calliope whispered, her voice barely audible above the crowd's murmur. I can't remember what happened." The judge, he was alive when I went to see him about Mrs. Hartwell's foreclosure. Then I woke up, and there was blood. And shut your lying mouth. Mayor Blackwater snarled, backhanding her across the face. The crack of flesh on flesh echoed across the square like a gunshot. Calliope's head snapped sideways, blood trickling from her split lip. But she didn't cry out. That did it. Flint's Colt cleared leather with supernatural speed, the barrel coming to rest against the mayor's temple before the man could blink. A touch. Her again, and they'll be scraping pieces of your brain off that platform for a week. "You're making a mistake," Sheriff Grimm warned, though his voice lacked conviction. "Interfering with a legal execution, nothing legal about murdering an innocent woman." Flint cut him off. "Especially when the real killer's probably standing right here in this crowd, watching his handiwork come to fruition." A ripple of unease passed through the gathered townspeople. Flint had struck closer to the truth than anyone realized, and somewhere in that sea of faces, a killer was starting to sweat. "I'm taking her," Flint announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Anyone who wants to stop me is welcome too. Try, you can't just." Mayor Blackwater started. The Colt pressed harder against his skull and he fell silent. "Watch me." Flint backed toward the platform, his gun trained on the crowd, while his free hand cut Calliope's bonds with a knife that appeared as if by magic. Her blindfold fell away, revealing eyes the color of jade, beautiful, terrified, and utterly lost. Can you walk? He asked softly. She nodded, struggling to her feet on unsteady legs. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Flint's smile was gentle this time, transforming his harsh features into something almost tender. Maybe not, but I know innocence when I see it. And I know what it looks like when someone's being framed for murder. The abandoned mineshaft 3 miles outside Riverside provided perfect cover as Flint tended to Calliope's wounds by flickering candlelight. Her wrists bore rope burns from the restraints. And the mayor's blow had left an ugly bruise across her cheek, but she was alive for now. They'll come after us, she said quietly, wincing as he cleaned the cut on her lip with whiskey. Aye! The whole town thinks I'm a murderer. Let them come. Flint's voice held no fear, only deadly certainty. I've been running from worse than small town. Sheriffs my whole life. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it, too intimate for strangers hiding in the dark. But something about this man, this dangerous, beautiful stranger who'd risked everything to save her, made her want to know his secrets. Flint paused in his ministrations, his pale eyes meeting hers in the candlelight. Why did I save you? Or, why have I been running? Both. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with careful precision, he began rolling up his sleeves. The firelight revealed scars crisscrossing his forearms, some from bullets, others from knives, and a few that looked suspiciously like brands. 10 years ago, I watched my brother hang for a crime he didn't commit, he said finally. Just like they were about to do to you. Town called him a horse thief, but I knew better. The real thief was the sheriff's own son, too important to face justice. Calliope's breath caught. What did you do? What I should have done sooner. I killed every man who put that noose around Daniel's neck. Sheriff, judge, mayor, the whole corrupt lot of them. His voice held no remorse, only cold satisfaction. Been running ever since. And now, you've done it again. For me, her fingers touched his hand where it rested on the makeshift bandage. A complete stranger. Not a stranger. The admission came out rougher than he'd intended. I watched you for 3 days before the execution, saw how you fought for that widow's family, how you gave food to hungry children, even when you barely had enough for yourself. Saw how you carried yourself with dignity, even when the whole town turned against you. Her cheeks flushed pink in the candlelight. You were watching me? Couldn't help myself? His thumb traced the line of her jaw with surprising gentleness. Never seen anyone so beautiful, inside and out. Certainly never met a woman worth staying in one place for. The confession hung between them like morning mist, fragile and dangerous. Calliope had heard whispers about the mysterious drifter who'd arrived on the Tuesday stage. How he'd cleaned out 3 card sharps at the saloon. How his eyes held secrets darker than midnight. But she'd never imagined those eyes would look at her with such naked longing. I didn't kill Judge Pemberton, she whispered, needing him to believe her. I went to his chambers to plead for Mrs. Hartwell's farm. She's got 6 children and nowhere else to go. But when I got there, something was wrong. The room was spinning, and I felt so strange, like I was walking through thick honey. Next thing I remember, I was holding a bloody knife. Flint frowned, his gunfighter's instincts picking up on something important. Spinning room? Like you'd been drugged? Yes, but how did you... Because someone wanted you unconscious long enough to set the scene. Question is, who benefits from both the judges? Death and your execution? Before Calliope could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the mine shaft. Flint was on his feet instantly, Colt in hand, positioning himself between her and the entrance. How many? She whispered. 6 riders. Maybe 7. His jaw tightened with grim determination. Stay behind me and keep low. Sheriff Grimm's voice boomed from outside. Come out peaceful, Ashmore. You've got nowhere to run. Like hell I don't, Flint muttered. But Calliope could see the calculation in his eyes. 7 men with rifles against 1 man with a pistol, even a man of his reputation, made for poor odds. There's another way out, she said suddenly. The back tunnel. It leads to Widow's Creek. Can you make it? I grew up playing in these mines. I know every passage. Flint nodded, making his decision. Go. I'll hold them here as long as I can, not without you. The words surprised them both with their intensity. I won't lose another person who risked everything for me? Another person? Her face crumpled with old grief. My brother tried to protect me from Judge Pemberton's attentions. The judge had him arrested on false charges and sent to prison, where he died of fever. That's why I went to see Pemberton that night, to confront him about destroying my family.
Understanding
Dawned in Flint's eyes. And someone used your grief as the perfect cover for murder. Ashmore, Sheriff Grimm called again. I'm counting to 10, then we're coming in. Flint grabbed the candle and their few supplies. Together then. But we moved fast and quiet as they disappeared into the dark tunnels. Others saw the figure watching from the ridge above, someone who'd followed the posse, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what they'd started in Judge Pemberton's chambers. The underground creek ran swift and cold beneath Riverside, carrying them through limestone caverns that had sheltered outlaws and lovers for generations. Calliope led the way through passages narrow as coffins and chambers vast as cathedrals, her intimate knowledge of the mines their only advantage against the men hunting them. There, she whispered, pointing to a shaft of moonlight piercing the darkness ahead. Widow's Creek. It comes out behind the Hartwell farm. But as they emerged from the cave mouth, Flint's hand shot out to stop her. In the silvery light, he could see riders surrounding the farmhouse, too many riders for a simple search party. It's a trap, he breathed. Someone knew you'd come here. Mrs. Hartwell stood on her porch with her 6 children clustered behind her, their faces pale with terror. Sheriff Grimm sat his horse in the yard, his rifle trained on the family. I know you can hear me, Ashmore. The sheriff called toward the caves. You got 2 choices. Surrender yourself and the murderess, or watch this whole family pay for harboring fugitives. The youngest Hartwell child, a girl no more than 5, began to cry. The sound cut through Calliope like a blade. They're innocent, she whispered fiercely. I won't let them suffer because of me. It's not because of you, Flint replied, his mind working furiously. Think about it. How did Grimm know we'd come here? How did he have time to surround the place when we took the most direct route through the caves? Realization dawned in her jade eyes, someone told him. Someone who knew I'd try to help Mrs. Hartwell. Someone who's been manipulating this whole situation from the beginning. A new voice cut through the night, air smooth, cultured, and utterly without mercy. How very perceptive of you both. Mayor Blackwater emerged from behind the farmhouse, no longer the pompous politician, but something far more dangerous. His expensive suit was immaculate despite the night's ride, and his smile held the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. You orchestrated all of this? Calliope accused, the pieces falling into place. Judge Pemberton's murder, the frame-up, even the execution, it was all you. The good judge was becoming inconvenient, Blackwater admitted with theatrical regret. His conscience was troubling him about certain land deals we'd arranged, deals that would make us both very wealthy men. When he threatened to expose our arrangement, well, I simply couldn't allow that. So you killed him and blamed her, Flint growled, his hand inching toward his gun. I drugged her laudanum in her evening tea, then used her own grief against Judge Pemberton as the perfect motive. Quite elegant, really. 2 problems solved with 1 crime. Mrs. Hartwell gasped from the porch. You monster. She was trying to save our farm. Which brings us to the second benefit of this arrangement, Blackwater continued smoothly. With Miss Meridian dead and the judge silenced permanently, there's no one left to contest my claim on these worthless properties. The railroad company is paying handsomely for a clear right-of-way through this valley. Flint's eyes narrowed to slits. You're stealing their land.
How?
I'm facilitating progress. These hard-scrabble farmers will receive fair compensation for their properties after all legal obstacles are removed. Of course, fair compensation. Mrs. Hartwell's voice cracked with desperate fury. You offered us $10 for land worth $10,000, my dear woman? Take my offer, or find yourself facing the same fabricated charges that befell Miss Meridian here. The threat hung in the air like poison. Calliope could see the calculating cruelty in Blackwater's eyes, the casual way he'd destroyed lives for profit. Her brother had died in prison because of this man's greed. Judge Pemberton, corrupt though he was, had died because he'd grown a conscience too late. Let them go, she said, stepping into the moonlight with her hands raised. You want me dead? Fine, but leave these people alone. Calliope, no, Flint warned, but she was already walking toward the farmhouse. Actually, Blackwater mused, I think I'll keep them alive as witnesses to your tragic death while resisting arrest. Sheriff Grimm will be forced to shoot you both. When you attempt to harm these innocent children, the plan was diabolical in its simplicity. With Flint and Calliope dead, there would be no one left to expose Blackwater's crimes. The families would be too terrified to resist his land grab, and he'd emerge as the hero who brought the fugitive killers to justice. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what a man in love would do to protect the womanhood, captured his heart. Flint's Colt materialized in his hand with liquid grace, the barrel finding Sheriff Grimm's chest before the man could react. New plan, Blackwater. You're going to tell everyone in this valley exactly what you just told us. You're outnumbered 10-1. The mayor laughed. You can't possibly. His words died as shapes emerged from the darkness around the farmhouse. Not more of Blackwater's men, but farmers and townspeople, dozens of them, armed with rifles and righteous anger. Leading them was Dr. Nathaniel Westbrook, the town physician who'd been quietly investigating Judge Pemberton's death. We heard everything. Blackwater. Every word. The mayor's composure cracked like thin ice as he found himself surrounded by the very people he'd been systematically robbing. Farmers he'd cheated, widows he'd threatened, shopkeepers he'd extorted. They formed a tightening circle of frontier justice that no amount of political influence could break. This is preposterous, Blackwater blustered, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. You can't seriously believe the word of a known killer and a fugitive murderess over your elected mayor. We believe what we heard with our own ears, Dr. Westbrook replied calmly. He was a small man with kind eyes, but his voice carried the authority of someone who'd delivered both babies and death sentences in his long career. Miss Meridian, I owe you an apology. When I examined Judge Pemberton's body, I found traces of a sedative in his system, the same laudanum you were given. I should have spoken up sooner. Calliope felt weak with relief. You knew I was innocent? I suspected. The wound pattern was wrong for someone your size, and the judge's defensive injuries suggested he'd fought a much larger attacker. But I needed proof before I could challenge the mayor's version of events. Sheriff Grimm shifted nervously in his saddle, his rifle wavering between targets. Doc, even if that's true, these two are still fugitives. I got a duty. Your duty is to uphold justice, not execute innocent people, interrupted Samuel Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell's eldest son. The boy was barely 16, but his eyes held the hard wisdom of someone who'd grown up too fast. Heard Blackwater confess to murder and conspiracy. Confess. The mayor's laugh was brittle with hysteria. I confess to nothing. This is all a misunderstanding that's going to cost you the rest of your life, Flint said, quietly. His gun never wavered from Sheriff Grimm's chest, but his attention was focused on Blackwater with the single-minded intensity of a predator stalking wounded prey. You killed Judge Pemberton because he grew a conscience. You framed Calliope because she stood between you and easy money. You would have let her hang rather than admit your crimes. Each word was precise as a surgeon's blade. Men like you are why I became what I am. And what exactly are you? Blackwater demanded, desperation making him bold. Justice, Flint replied simply. The word hung in the night air like a death sentence. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something larger than a simple crime and punishment. Was the reckoning that came when corruption finally faced consequences. Dr. Westbrook stepped forward, his black medical bag in hand. Before we proceed with any permanent solutions, I believe Sheriff Grimm should hear what else I discovered during my investigation. The sheriff's face paled. What do you mean? I mean that Mayor Blackwater hasn't been working alone. The land grab scheme required official cooperation, someone to forge documents, someone to intimidate witnesses, someone to ensure inconvenient evidence disappeared. That's a lie. Grimm protested, but his voice cracked with fear. Is it? Then perhaps you can explain why 3 separate families reported threats from your deputies after they refused to sell their properties. Or why the evidence from Judge Pemberton's chambers mysteriously vanished from your office. Double quotes, Mrs. Hartwell gasped. Sheriff, you were part of this? You knew they were going to hang an innocent woman? The truth written across Grimm's weathered face was answer enough. He traded his badge and his soul for a share of Blackwater's profits, convinced that one woman's death was a small price to pay for financial security. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered. Blackwater said she'd just disappeared, maybe head east, where nobody knew her. The hanging was supposed to be for show enough, Blackwater snarled, pulling a derringer from his vest. I'm not going to prison because of some sniveling sheriff and a meddling drifter. But he'd forgotten about Calliope. 3 days of being bound, beaten, and condemned to death had awakened something fierce in the seamstress. As Blackwater raised his weapon toward Flint, she lunged forward with desperate strength, her elbow connecting with the mayor's throat in a blow that sent him gasping to his knees. The derringer fired wild, its bullet sparking off a nearby rock. In the confusion that followed, Flint moved with deadly precision. His Colt barked once, and Sheriff Grimm's rifle spun from nerveless fingers. A second shot shattered Blackwater's derringer before the man could recover. It's over, Flint announced, his voice carrying absolute finality. Both of you are going to face a real judge, in a real court, with real evidence. No. Blackwater struggled to his feet, his face purple with rage and humiliation. I won't be destroyed by some nobody seamstress and a washed-up gunfighter. I have connections, influence. You have nothing, Dr. Westbrook interrupted quietly. I've already sent telegrams to the territorial governor detailing your crimes. Federal marshals are on their way to ensure you receive a fair trial, something you denied, Miss Meridian. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. But these weren't more corrupt deputies, or hired guns. The riders who emerged from the darkness wore the silver stars of territorial marshals, their faces grim with purpose. Marshal Victoria Kane dismounted with practiced efficiency, her keen eyes taking in the scene. She was a legend in her own right, the first woman to wear a federal badge, known for her unwavering integrity and her skill with both gun and law book. Dr. Westbrook, she nodded respectfully. I received your telegram. Are these the men responsible for Judge Pemberton's murder? They are, Marshal. Along with conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and corruption of office. Marshal Kane's gaze settled on Flint and Calliope, noting their positions and the obvious protectiveness in the gunfighter's stance. And these would be the fugitives who've been clearing their names the hard way. Something like that, Flint replied carefully. He'd had dealings with federal marshals before, not all of them pleasant. But Marshal Kane surprised him with a slight smile. Mr. Ashmore, your reputation precedes you, as does your recent change in ... methodology. Word is you've been helping folks instead of hunting them. Folks deserve justice, he said simply. Real justice, not the kind bought and paid for by men like Blackwater. Indeed they do, she turned to Calliope with genuine warmth. Miss Meridian, on behalf of the territorial government, I apologize for the injustice you've suffered. Your name will be completely cleared, and restitution will be made. 2 weeks. Later, Calliope stood in the doorway of her seamstress shop, watching Flint repair the front steps with the same meticulous care he'd once applied to survival. The town square bustled with normal activity, children playing, merchants hawking their wares, farmers discussing the weather, as if the recent horrors had been nothing more than a shared nightmare. But everything had changed. Mayor Blackwater and Sheriff Grimm were awaiting trial in the territorial capital, their corruption exposed in newspapers across 3 states. The land grab scheme had collapsed, leaving dozens of families secure in their homes. Most importantly, Calliope was free, not just from the gallows, but from the shadow of suspicion that had darkened her life. You don't have to do that, she said, stepping outside with a cup of coffee for him. I can hire someone to fix the steps. Flint looked up from his work, sawdust clinging to his dark hair and shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal those telltale scars. Can't have customers tripping on broken boards. It's bad for business. She smiled at his practical tone, but they both knew his motivations ran deeper. 2 weeks he'd been staying at the boarding house. 2 weeks of finding excuses to linger near her shop, to walk her home in the evenings, to ensure she was safe and settling back into normal life. 2 weeks of dancing around feelings that had ignited in violence and deepened in danger. Besides, he added, accepting the coffee gratefully, I owe you a debt. You owe me nothing. If anything, I owe you my life. Not talking about that. His pale eyes held hers with startling intensity. I'm talking about what you gave me when you chose to trust a stranger with blood on his hands. Now Calliope felt her breath catch. They'd shared danger and desperation. But this quiet moment on her front steps felt more intimate than all their dramatic adventures combined. What did I give you? She asked softly. A reason to stop running? The confession hung between them like morning mist, beautiful and fragile. Flint had spent 10 years as a drifter, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. Never allowing himself to care about anything beyond survival and revenge. But this woman, this brave, stubborn, impossible woman, had changed everything. Flint, she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. Let me finish. I know what I am, Calliope. I know what I've done. Got more blood on my hands than a battlefield. Surgeon, more enemies than a politician, has promises. Any man with sense would ride out of town tonight and never look back. But I'd rather spend one day loving you than a lifetime running from ghosts. His voice roughened with emotion. Question is, can you love a man like me? A killer who's trying to learn how to build instead of destroy? The question shattered something inside her chest, releasing feelings she'd been trying to contain since that first moment on the platform. This dangerous, beautiful man had risked everything for her not once, but repeatedly. He'd seen her at her lowest moment and chosen to fight for her dignity, her life, her future. I already do, she whispered. I fell in love with you the moment you put yourself between me and that axe. I stayed in love when you held me in the mine and told me your secrets. I'll love you tomorrow when you finish those steps, and next week when you find some other excuse to hover around my shop like a protective wolf. Flint's hammer slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the wooden planks. Calliope, ... I love your hands, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. These scarred, deadly hands that are so gentle when they touch me. I love your eyes. Cold as winter to everyone else, but warm as summer when you look at me. I love that you've killed men who deserved killing. I love that you're trying to become someone worthy of building a life with. He was on his feet then, coffee cup forgotten, his hands cupping her face with reverent care. You sure about this? About us? Because once I stay for good. No more drifting, no more running. Just me and you and whatever life we can build. Together, I've never been more sure of anything. Their kiss was soft and sweet, nothing like the desperate passion that had sustained them through danger. This was a promise, a commitment, a pledge to face whatever came next as partners rather than strangers thrown together by circumstance. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and grinning like children. So, Calliope said, straightening his collar with possessive satisfaction, what does a reformed gunfighter do for work in a place like Riverside? Flint glanced around the quiet town square, considering possibilities. Well, I'm fair with carpentry. Could do worse than building houses instead of filling graves. The town could use a good carpenter, she agreed, especially one who's handy with a hammer and knows how to protect what he builds. Speaking of building, ... He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, clearly handmade with loving attention to detail. I've been working on something for you? Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a ring carved from what looked like black walnut. It was simple, but beautiful, polished to a warm gleam, and sized perfectly for her finger. Flint, it's beautiful. But when did you? Every night for the past 2 weeks? Sitting in my room at the boarding house? Thinking about how to ask a woman like you to marry a man like me? His voice held nervous uncertainty she'd never heard before. I know it's not much. No gold or fancy stones. It's perfect, she interrupted, slipping the ring onto her finger where it fit like it had always belonged. Absolutely perfect? That's a yes? That's a yes to everything. Marriage, partnership, building a life together in this little town that nearly killed us both. She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him again. But I have one condition. Flint's eyebrows rose. Name it. Finish those steps before the wedding. I don't want my customers tripping on their way to congratulate us. His laughter rang across the square, rich and warm and completely free of the darkness that had shadowed it for so many years. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in October, giving the town exactly 3 weeks to plan what promised to be the social event of the decade. Word had spread across the territory about the seamstress who'd nearly hanged and the gunfighter who'd saved her, transforming their love story into the kind of legend people would tell their grandchildren. But first, there were practical matters to attend to. I can't marry you in the church, Reverend Michaels explained apologetically as he sat in Calliope's shop, hat in hand and face creased with concern. Not that I don't want to, mind you. It's just, well, the congregation is split on whether a man with Mr. Ashmore's reputation should be wed in the house of God. Calliope looked up from the wedding dress she was altering, a beautiful cream silk that had belonged to her mother, now being carefully adjusted to fit her smaller frame. What does the Bible say about redemption, Reverend? About second chances? And the power of love to transform hearts? Well, it says quite a lot, actually. Then perhaps your congregation needs reminding that Christ himself dined with tax collectors and sinners. Her needle flashed through the fabric with precise stitches. Besides, if Flint isn't welcome in God's house, then neither am I. We'll find another way to solemnize our vows. From his position near the window where he was installing new shutters, Flint smiled at the steel in her voice. 3 weeks of engagement had only confirmed what he'd suspected from the beginning. Calliope Meridian was a force of nature, disguised as a small-town seamstress. Actually, came a new voice from the doorway. I believe I can solve this particular problem. Marshal Victoria Kane entered the shop with her usual brisk efficiency, but her smile was warm as she nodded to the engaged couple. I'm qualified to perform marriages under territorial law. If you'd be amenable to a civil ceremony, I'd be honored to officiate. Marshal Kane. Calliope set aside her sewing and rose to greet their unexpected visitor.
What brings you back to Riverside? Official business and personal interest? The territorial governor wants to present you both with commendations for
your role in exposing the corruption here. Plus, I wanted to make sure you were settling into married life without any complications. Flint frowned, his protective instincts immediately alert. What kind of complications? The kind that come with fame and notoriety. Kane's expression grew serious. Your story has been picked up by newspapers from here to New York. The gunfighter and the seamstress has captured the public imagination in ways you might not expect. As if summoned by her words, the sound of multiple wagons rumbling into town reached them through the open door. Flint moved to investigate and cursed under his breath at what he saw. A caravan of fancy carriages and supply wagons had arrived in Riverside's main square, scourging a small army of well-dressed strangers. With notebooks, cameras, and theatrical equipment, leading them was a portly man in an expensive suit who surveyed the town like a general planning a campaign. Novel writers, Marshal Kane explained. Theater producers, journalists, even a photographer from Harper's Weekly. They want to document your story, possibly stage a dramatic recreation of the rescue and trial. Calliope joined Flint at the window, her face paling as she watched the circus setting up in their quiet square. They want to turn our lives into entertainment. Fame's a double-edged sword, the marshal warned. It can bring opportunities, but it also brings attention you might not want. Some of those writers are already calling you the Angel of Riverside, and Flint the Avenging Ghost. Ridiculous, Flint muttered, but Calliope could see the tension in his shoulders. He'd spent years avoiding attention, moving through life like smoke and shadow. The idea of being a public figure was anathema to everything he'd learned about survival. There's more, Kane continued. 3 different publishers want a commission. Books about your story. Theatrical company in San Francisco wants to stage a melodrama called Love at the Gallows. And there's talk of a traveling West show that would pay handsomely for your participation. Absolutely not, Flint said. Flatly, we're not performing monkeys dancing for crowds. I agree, Calliope added, though she couldn't help wondering about the financial opportunities. The shop was barely profitable, and starting a new life required resources they didn't have. But perhaps we should hear what they're offering before we dismiss everything outright. Flint's jaw tightened. You want to turn our love story into a circus act? I want us to be practical. She touched his arm gently. We have a wedding to pay for, a house to build, a future to secure. If these people are willing to pay for our story, maybe we should listen. Before Flint could respond, the portly man from the caravan burst through the shop door without knocking, his arms spread wide in theatrical greeting. Miss Meridian. Mr. Ashmore, what an absolute pleasure to meet you both. His voice boomed with the practiced projection of a stage performer. Barnabas Goldwright, producer extraordinaire and purveyor of America's finest dramatic entertainments. Get out, Flint said quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. Now, no need for hostility. Come bearing gifts opportunities that could make you both wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. Goldwright pulled out a leather portfolio thick with contracts and cash. $5,000 for exclusive rights to your story, plus percentage royalties from all productions, publications, and performances. The sum was staggering more money than most frontier families saw in a lifetime. Calliope felt her resolve wavering, but one look at Flint's face told her the cost would be too high. Our story's not for sale, she said firmly. But everything's for sale, my dear. It's simply a matter of finding the right price. Goldwright's smile never faltered. Perhaps you'd prefer a different arrangement? We could hire you as consultants, ensure complete creative control. The lady said no. Flint stepped between Goldwright and Calliope, his presence suddenly filling the small shop with menace. So did I time for you to leave? You're making a mistake. This story has everything romance, danger, heroism, redemption. The public is hungry for tales of the frontier. Yours is the most compelling. Marshal Kane cleared her throat pointedly. Mr. Goldwright, I believe you've received your answer. Perhaps it's time to respect their wishes. The producer's theatrical mask slipped slightly, revealing calculating eyes beneath. Of course. But consider this. My friends, your story is already being told. With or without your cooperation, books will be written, plays will be performed, fortunes will be made. Wouldn't you prefer to benefit from your own fame, rather than watch others profit from your pain? The truth of his words hit like a physical blow. They'd become public property the moment Flint had stepped onto that platform. Their private tragedy transformed into public entertainment, whether they participated or not. At least accept this, Goldwright continued, placing a thick envelope on Calliope's sewing table. It's a token of our appreciation for your time, with no strings attached. And when you realize the inevitable that your story belongs to history, now remember that. Goldwright Productions treats its partners with respect and generosity. He swept out as dramatically as he'd entered, leaving the three of them staring at the envelope. Don't even think about it, Flint warned. But Calliope was already reaching for the envelope, her seamstress's fingers quick and sure. Inside was more cash than she'd ever seen, enough to pay for the wedding, buy lumber for a house, establish Flint's carpentry business with proper tools and equipment. It's not about the money, she said quietly. It's about control. If we don't tell our story, someone else will. And their version might not be kind to either of us. Marshal Kane nodded thoughtfully. She has a point. I've seen what dime novelists do to real people's lives. They turn heroes into caricatures and villains into monsters, at least if you cooperate. You have some say in how you're portrayed. Flint stared out the window at the growing crowd of writers and gawkers, his expression unreadable. 20 years I've been invisible. Ghost of the territories, they called me. Now suddenly, everyone wants to know my story, wants to put my face on their covers and my name in their headlines. The question is, Calliope said softly, what do we do with that attention? Do we hide from it, or do we use it for something? Good. What do you mean? Her eyes lit with sudden inspiration. What if we don't just tell our story? What if we tell all the stories? All the women like me who faced injustice. All the men like you who've been branded killers when they were really protectors. What if we use this platform to shine light on corruption, to give voice to the voiceless. Flint turned from the window, intrigued despite himself. You want to become crusaders? Want to become partners in every sense of the word. Business partners, life partners, partners in making sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. She stood and took his hands, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future.
Oh.
Year later, Calliope Ashmore stood on the porch of their new home, watching her husband teach carpentry to a group of young men whose lives had taken wrong turns. The house itself was a testament to Flint's skill-sturdy timber frame, wide windows, and a workshop attached where he crafted furniture with the same precision he'd once applied to gunwork. But their real masterpiece wasn't built of wood and nails. The Riverside Foundation for Frontier Justice read the sign above the workshop door, painted in Calliope's careful script. What had started as a simple decision to control their own narrative had grown into something. Neither of them had imagined a network of support for victims of corruption and a pathway to redemption for those seeking to escape lives of violence. The Foundation's first case had been Samuel Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell's eldest son, who'd been framed for cattle rustling by the same corrupt network that had tried to steal his family's land. Working with Marshall Kane and Dr. Westbrook, they'd exposed the conspiracy and seen Samuel's name cleared. The second case had been closer to home. Mrs. Ashmore, young woman, approached hesitantly, her clothes travel-worn and her eyes holding. Familiar shadows. I'm Luna Brightwater. I've come about your advertisement in the Denver Post. The advertisement had been Calliope's idea. Simple notice, offering assistance to those who've suffered injustice on the frontier and seek truth over vengeance. They'd published it in newspapers across 5 territories, never expecting the response it would generate. Please, call me Calliope. And you're welcome here, whatever your story. She gestured toward the porch chairs Flint had crafted, each one designed for comfort and conversation. What brings you to Riverside? Luna's story tumbled out in fits and starts. Corrupt sheriff in Colorado, who'd murdered her father and framed her brother for the crime. She'd spent 2 years gathering evidence, but every lawyer she'd approached had been too frightened or too bought to help. I heard about what you and your husband did here, Luna finished. How you exposed the truth and saw justice done. I was hoping, ... I was praying you might help me do the same. By the time Flint emerged from the workshop, wiping sawdust from his hands, Calliope had already made their decision. The Foundation would take Luna's case, provide her with legal support and protection while they investigated the corruption. In Colorado? Another one? Flint asked, settling beside his wife with easy familiarity. Another one, she confirmed. Make 7 active cases now, 80 corrected. Got a telegram today from that journalist in Santa Fe. The story about the mining company fraud broke yesterday. 3 executives arrested, 200 families getting their land back. They sat in comfortable silence watching the sun set over. The mesa that had sheltered them during their flight from injustice. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They'd found their purpose by becoming exactly what they'd never intended to be: public figures. Crusaders, symbols of hope for those who'd lost faith in frontier justice. Any regrets? Calliope asked. The question that had become their evening ritual. About which part? Saving you from the gallows? Marrying you? Or starting a crusade against corruption across the Western Territories? All of it. Any of it. Flint considered the question with the same careful attention he gave to cutting joints for fine furniture. I regret that it took me so long to find you. I regret that your sister and my brother didn't live to see us happy. I regret that there are so many people like Luna who need our help. But I don't regret a single choice that led us here. He took her hand, thumb tracing the simple wooden ring that had become famous in its own right, copied by craftsmen across the territories as a symbol of love built on solid foundations rather than flashy display. Do you? Never, she said without hesitation. It's not even the gallows. If I hadn't been up there, you never would have stayed. No, I would have stayed, Flint corrected softly. Might have taken me longer to work up the courage to court the prettiest seamstress in town, but I would have stayed. You were already under my skin by then, Calliope Ashmore. That platform just gave me an excuse to do something about it. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, not the frantic gallop of pursued fugitives this time, but the steady pace of travelers who knew they'd reached sanctuary. Marshal Kane emerged from the gathering dusk, her badge glinting in the porch light. Victoria. Calliope rose to greet their friend and most reliable ally. "What brings you to Riverside this time?" "Two things," the marshal replied, accepting Flint's offer of a chair with grateful exhaustion. "First, the territorial governor wants to offer you both official positions. Deputy marshals with jurisdiction over corruption cases across the Western territories." Flint and Calliope exchanged glances. Official badges would give them legal authority to match their growing reputation, but it would also tie them to government bureaucracy they'd learned to distrust. "We'll consider it," Calliope said diplomatically. "What's the second thing?" Kane's smile turned mysterious. "President Cleveland wants to meet you both. There's talk of establishing a federal task force to combat corruption on the frontier, and your foundation is being considered as the model for a nationwide program." The silence stretched long enough for cricket songs to fill the space between them. Finally, Flint spoke. "How's the president feel about appointing former gunfighters to federal positions?" he said, and I quote, "Sometimes it takes a reformed sinner to catch an unrepentant one." Kane's grin widened. "I think he'll like you both." As their friend departed and night settled over Riverside, Flint and Calliope remained on their porch, hands linked and hearts full. The drifter, who'd loved the girl at the block, had indeed stayed when she was saved at the last minute. But more than that, he'd found his true calling in the process. "So," Calliope said eventually, "ready to save the entire country from corruption? With you as my partner, I'm ready for anything." Their laughter carried across the mesa, mixing with night sounds and the distant whistle of the evening train. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to turn their hard-won happiness into hope for others. Tonight, they were simply a carpenter and a seamstress who'd found love in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate tragedies. The drifter had stopped drifting. The seamstress had found her true pattern. And together, they'd discovered that real love wasn't just about staying for someone. It was about building something with them that would outlast any single lifetime, something that would make the world a little more just, a little kinder, a little more worthy of the faith two wounded souls had placed in each other beneath the vast frontier sky. In the distance, Coyote howled at the rising moon, and Flint's arms tightened around his wife. But there was no danger in the sound anymore. Well, the wild song of a land where justice could still triumph, where love could still conquer, and where second chances were always possible for those brave enough to reach for them.